History is written by the victors. But what if I told you there's a chapter that almost everyone decided to leave out? A story of a superpower so vast, so influential, that its neighbors, the Romans, the Persians, the Chinese, all seemed to pretend it wasn't there. This isn't a myth or a legend. This is the story of the Kushan Empire, the ghost empire of the ancient world. Imagine an empire stretching from Central Asia down into northern India, sitting right at the crossroads of the world's most powerful civilizations. To the west, the mighty Roman Empire. To the east, the Han dynasty of China. To the south, the Parthian and later Sassanid empires of Persia. The Kushans were the glue that held the ancient world together, the central hub of the legendary Silk Road. They controlled the flow of silk, spices, gold, and ideas. Logically, they should be as famous as Rome or Han China, but they're not. Why? Why would these great empires, who meticulously documented their neighbors, their wars, and their trade partners, give the Kushans the silent treatment? That's the mystery we're going to unravel today. The story begins in the 1st century CE. A group of nomadic people, the Yuezhi, were pushed out of their homeland in what is now western China. After a long migration, they settled in Bactria, a region in modern-day Afghanistan and Central Asia. From this melting pot of cultures, one leader, Khaula Kadphises, united the tribes and founded what would become the Kushan Empire. His successors expanded their territory aggressively. Under its greatest king, Kanishka the Great, the empire reached its zenith. They controlled a vast, multicultural, and incredibly wealthy territory. They were a military force to be reckoned with, a hub of artistic innovation, and a center for religious thought, particularly for the spread of Buddhism. So, if they were so important, where are they in the history books of their neighbors? Let's start with Rome. The Romans were obsessed with trade. Roman aristocrats couldn't get enough of Chinese silk, Indian spices, and exotic perfumes. And where did most of this trade pass through? You guessed it, Kushan territory. There's clear archaeological evidence for this. Kushan coins have been found in Roman archaeological sites, and Roman gold coins were melted down and reminted by Kushan kings. We have Roman-style glassware found in Kushan cities. The connection was undeniable and economically vital for both sides. Yet, if you read Roman historians like Tacitus or Pliny the Elder, mentions of the Kushans are frustratingly vague or non-existent. They talk about Bactrians or Indians, but rarely, if ever, name the powerful empire that controlled these lands. Why the silence? One theory is that acknowledging the Kushans would have been politically inconvenient. Rome saw itself as the center of the civilized world. To admit that a huge portion of their luxury goods and economic prosperity depended on another, equally powerful empire would have been a blow to Roman pride and propaganda. It was easier to portray these goods as coming from some distant, mysterious land of India or the East, rather than a specific organized state that could negotiate terms, set prices, and potentially cut off the supply. The Kushans weren't just a trading partner. They were a rival superpower. Admitting their existence was admitting a vulnerability. Rome preferred to maintain an illusion of total dominance. They weren't trading with an equal. They were simply acquiring exotic goods from the vague, far-off Orient. Now, let's look east to Han China. The Chinese were meticulous record keepers. Their historical texts, like the Book of the Later Han, are treasure troves of information about the world as they knew it. And they do mention the Kushans, or the Zhuang, as they called them. But the way they described them is fascinating. Initially, they are documented as vassals or a lesser state. There is a famous story of a Kushan king proposing marriage to a Han princess and being bluntly rejected by the Chinese general Ban Chao, who saw it as an insult. The Kushans retaliated by sending an army of 70,000 soldiers, which Ban Chao cleverly defeated not through a direct battle, but by cutting off their supply lines. After this, Chinese records suggest the Kushans went back to paying tribute. But here's where it gets tricky. Kushan sources tell a different story. Some interpretations of their own records suggest they achieved victories against the Chinese and established a more equal footing. The Chinese narrative of a subordinate Kushan state might have been a classic case of historical spin. For the Han dynasty, which operated under the mandate of heaven and saw the emperor as the ruler of all under heaven, acknowledging a rival empire on its western border was ideologically impossible. All other states had to be tributaries or barbarians. So they framed their relationship with the Kushans in a way that fit their worldview, downplaying Kushan strength and exaggerating Chinese control. It was less about ignoring them and more about rewriting the narrative to maintain their own sense of superiority. And what about the Persians, their neighbors to the south and west? The relationship here was more openly hostile. The Kushans and the Parthian, and later the Sassanid, empires were direct rivals, often clashing over territory in what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan. Persian sources, like the famous inscriptions of Shapur I, do mention the Kushans, but they mention them as a conquered people. Shapur boasts of his control extending up to the borders of Koshanshah. This, of course, is the Persian perspective. For much of their history, the Kushans were the dominant force in the region, pushing the Parthians back. The Sassanids did eventually gain the upper hand and contribute to the Kushan decline, but for a long time, the Kushans were a major thorn in their side. So, like the Romans and Chinese, the Persians only acknowledged the Kushans when they could frame it as a victory. When the Kushans were powerful, it was better to say nothing at all. So we have three of the ancient world's greatest empires, all engaged in a kind of collective denial. The Romans pretended the Kushans were just a vague part of the Orient to protect their economic pride. The Chinese framed them as a subordinate state to fit their political ideology. The Persians only wrote about them once they could claim to have defeated them. The Kushans were too powerful to be a vassal, too foreign to be an ally, and too crucial to be an enemy. They occupied a geopolitical blind spot. They were the ultimate frenemy to everyone. Acknowledging their true power would have forced these other empires to reevaluate their own place in the world, and that was a truth they weren't ready to face. This lack of external documentation is compounded by a problem from within the Kushan Empire itself. Unlike the Romans with their Latin literature, or the Chinese with their extensive court histories, the Kushans didn't leave behind a large body of written narrative texts. Their history is pieced together primarily from three things: coins, inscriptions, and art. Their coins are incredible historical documents. They feature a pantheon of Greek, Iranian, and Indian gods, showcasing the empire's incredible cultural fusion. The kings are depicted in their unique attire, and the inscriptions are often in Bactrian, an Iranian language written with the Greek alphabet. Their inscriptions, like the one found at Rabatak, were game changers, helping scholars confirm the lineage of Kushan kings and the extent of their empire. But these don't tell a story in the same way a book by a historian does. They are snapshots, not a continuous narrative. The art of the Kushan Empire, particularly the Gandharan school of art, is another vital clue. This is where you see the first ever human depictions of the Buddha, often with features that look remarkably Greco-Roman. Think of a Buddha statue that looks like it was carved by someone who also carved statues of Apollo. This artistic explosion was only possible because the Kushans created a stable, wealthy, and tolerant environment where ideas from the East and West could meet and merge. The spread of Mahayana Buddhism along the Silk Road, a pivotal moment in world religious history, was largely thanks to Kushan patronage. Yet the people who facilitated this incredible cultural exchange left almost no stories of their own. So, why didn't they write more? It might be that their culture was more oral than written. It might be that their administrative language, Bactrian, never developed a major literary tradition in the way Latin or Chinese did. Or it might simply be that the text they did write, perhaps on perishable materials like palm leaves or parchment, have been lost to the ravages of time in the harsh Central Asian climate. Whatever the reason, this internal silence, combined with the external censorship of their neighbors, created the perfect storm for a great empire to be forgotten. By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the Koshan Empire began to fracture. They were pressured from the west by the rising Sassanid Empire in Persia and faced internal divisions. New powers were rising in India, like the Gupta Empire. The flow of Roman gold, which had fueled their economy, began to dry up as Rome faced its own crisis. The empire broke apart into smaller principalities, which were eventually absorbed by their more powerful neighbors. And as they faded from power, they also faded from memory. Without a strong written legacy of their own, and with their rivals having no interest in preserving their history, the Koshans were effectively erased. It was only in the 19th and 20th centuries, when archaeologists and linguists began to decipher their coins and inscriptions, that the true scale and importance of the Kushan Empire started to re-emerge. It was like discovering a lost continent on the map of ancient history. Today, the Kushans are a subject of intense academic study, but they remain largely unknown to the general public. They are a powerful reminder that history is not just a record of what happened, but also a reflection of who had the power to tell the story. The Koshans were a global superpower of their time, a bridge between East and West, and a crucible of culture and religion. They weren't ignored because they were insignificant. They were ignored because they were too significant. Their existence challenged the narratives of the empires around them, so those empires simply pretended they weren't there. The ghost empire of the Koshans teaches us that sometimes the most important stories are the ones hidden in the silence. Thanks for watching. If you found this dive into forgotten history as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that time tried to erase. Let me know in the comments which other lost civilizations you'd like to explore. See you in the next video.